Soon, secretive animals show up out of the blue and begin killing humankind, causing a prophetically calamitous occasion that doesn't leave numerous survivors. There are numerous hypotheses about what occurred, similar to a bug conveying a contamination, a purple murkiness, and a discipline for mankind. However, they're all bits of hearsay and no one has the genuine story. Around, Paul is searching for provisions when abruptly the alarms begin moaning. He promptly runs out and clears his path through the roads, stowing away when vital and creating some distance from any shouts and bombs. As the city gets shrouded in dark smoke, Paul comes to an unwanted house in the edges where he reunites with his children, who he should deal with alone. After 15 years, Paul's young men have developed into sound teens. They live in a similar house and go out during the day to look for provisions, yet they stay concealed around evening time. When the sun begins to set, Joseph covers the windows and advises their canine Rocco to get in the house. Paul holds up outside until he sees Thomas return and admonishes him for being late. Thomas makes sense of that. He enjoys assisting their neighbors, the Rose family, who with having a ranch. Then them three make a point to lock each entryway and window prior to eating. Yet again Paul reprimands Thomas, saying that in the event that he at any point is late again he will not be permitted to leave the limits any longer. Joseph derides his sibling for itself and a contention before long grows into an actual battle, yet Paul rapidly stops them and advises them that they're men, not creatures. After supper, Paul watches his child's play chess, however gets occupied when Rocco starts scratching and snarling at the floor. Seeing it as a sign, Paul and Thomas go ground floor and are surprised by the abrupt beating on the entryway. It appears to be the animals are attempting to get in. So they quickly hold the way to prevent them from constraining it open. There's loads of shaking and beating for a few seconds until the animals surrender and leave. Then Thomas calls Joseph out for not aiding, however Joseph uncovers he's been paying attention to find out more. There were 3 endeavors, the first was 10 seconds, the second was 20, and the last one recently won. Joseph accepts that the first was a test and the second was the real endeavor to get through while the third one was only a disappointed hit. The following day, they check the entryway and see all the hook blemishes on the wood. The entryway has lost strength. So Paul and his young men go out to search for wood to support it. They take every one of their discoveries back to the house and keeping in mind that Thomas hacks the wood, Paul minds Joseph, who is building something in the outbuilding. After some goading from Paul, Joseph concedes he's been attempting to fabricate a vehicle since he's fed up with feeling restricted and frightened. Anyway, he can't make it work. Paul is dazzled and investigates, rapidly making several progressions that at long last makes the vehicle run. Energized, Paul takes the youngsters on a ride to show them how to drive. They return home following an hour of meandering and Paul declares the windows actually need support. So he sends the young men to the waterway to rescue. Thomas flies off the handle since he had been guaranteed he could go to the ranch today. However, Paul says this is more significant. The siblings leave in the vehicle and Thomas begins faulting Joseph for this, saying Paul sent Thomas to simply to safeguard his sibling. Joseph doesn't think he wants security. So Thomas escapes the vehicle when they pass by the ranch and requests that Joseph get him returning. In the house, Paul wraps up building up the entryway and enjoys some time off to smoke alone by the cascade. As he glances around, he sees a dark dreadful opening in the stones. In the interim, Joseph goes to the waterway and binds himself to the vehicle prior to plummeting into an old deserted boat to search for provisions. Inside a storage he finds a centerfold girl from a messy magazine, which leaves him puzzled briefly. Then, at that point, he peers further inside and is unexpectedly frightened when a lot of bugs emerge from a junk heap. They fly around him and attempt to arrive at his skin, so he needs to leave quick. At the ranch, Thomas assists the family with the tasks, yet it's before long uncovered that his primary motivation to go there is the proprietor's girl Charlotte. Obviously the youngsters really like one another and they take a walk together on the field. Charlotte shows Thomas a rope attached to a tree, making sense of that when she was close to nothing. She was possibly permitted to play outside, assuming that she was contacting the tree, so she would attach herself to have more space to run while in fact actually connected to the tree. They likewise play a game in which they share insane speculations about what caused the end of the world. At the point when it's the ideal opportunity for Thomas to go, Charlotte gives him a warm embrace. The sun is beginning to set, so both young men need to pick up the pace. Paul gets back and gets stressed when he finds Rocco, however neither of his children. Joseph gets back in the vehicle and at first it wouldn't begin, yet after a couple of attempts he at last. Thomas is running as quick as possible and slips, so he winds up falling in a fissure in the ground. At the point when Joseph stops by to get his sibling, he doesn't see him around and simply continues onward. When he makes it home and lets his father know what occurred, Paul advises him to get inside and lock everything up while he and Rocco search for Thomas. In the fissure, Thomas awakens with an exceptionally sensitive body. Utilizing a lighter, he starts checking out the area and is stunned to see an animal arriving through an opening in the wall. It even shrieks, which is heard by Paul and Rocco. Moving cautiously, Thomas takes out a little blade and wounds the beast's hand, making it retreat into the opening. Nonetheless, when Thomas ventures back, a subsequent animal shows up above and gets his face. Thomas experiences difficulty breathing, however before he can drop, Paul shows up and pulls the beast back to kill it rapidly. In the wake of ensuring Thomas is fine, Paul and Rocco find a passage that takes them solidly into the cleft. It's risky to go through the woods at this hour, so they choose to remain in the cleft until dawn for assurance and block the entry. They can hear the animals getting through the opening, so they prepare a flare, just for the ground to begin shaking. It turns out the beasts are currently moving underground and catching the gathering in the fissure by covering the exit with soil. As Rocco continues to bark and the cleft won't quit thundering, Paul advises his child and the canine to move back as he puts the flare inside the opening that is opening in the ground. At the point when the animals attempt to connect, Paul makes a little blast that unfortunately hits him too. In the house, Joseph hears loads of squeaking and begins arranging. Minutes after the fact, he sits before the principal entryway with a rope attached to his seat, and he nods off. Before long, an animal maneuvers the wood covering an opening in the entryway and arrives at inside, causing its nail to develop to test in the event that Joseph is genuinely snoozing. At the point when the kid doesn't respond, the animal comes inside, just for Joseph to uncover he was imagining and pull the rope. An enclosure tumbles from the roof, in a split second catching the animal. Glad for himself, Joseph covers the enclosure with a sweeping and nods off. The following morning, he's concerned in light of the fact that the others haven't returned at this point, so he goes out in the vehicle to look. In the meantime, Thomas has dug through the fallen soil to open the entry once more and is hauling his vigorously injured father out. Rocco emerges also and follows the commotion of the vehicle to track down Joseph and guide him back to his loved ones. The siblings promptly cooperate to convey Paul to the vehicle and afterward to his bed at the house. While they talk about how to continue, Thomas at last notification the enclosure and looks under the cover, which makes the animal go off the deep end. Joseph promptly returns the cover, making sense of that light damages the beasts. Then they swathe Paul's injuries while Joseph makes sense of that the previous evening the animal required 8 seconds to come in, the briefest time yet. He's likewise certain there was a second animal that disappeared. Their way of behaving is changing excessively fast and Joseph closes something isn't correct. Thomas calls attention to that the animals are shrewd. The previous evening they killed a bundle in the cavern and perhaps they came here for vengeance, since Charlotte said they seldom go to the ranch. Joseph doesn't think they killed the animals, he figures just Paul got it done. To show what him can do, Thomas attempts to kill the animal in the enclosure. Joseph attempts to stop him since he needs to concentrate on it, and in the battle the beast emerges, rapidly concealing under the bed. At the point when it at last looks out, Rocco begins yapping at it, so the beast changes to assault. Joseph hurries to hold it down and Thomas then removes its head with a hatchet. As yet needing to find out more, Joseph takes the body to the horse shelter and fires opening it up while Rocco and a lot of bugs watch. Regardless of the amount he cuts, however, he acquires no further comprehension of what it could be. Then, at that point, Thomas lets him know that they ought to take Paul to Charlotte's homestead since they have a superior house and genuine medication. Joseph doesn't figure the roses will help him, however Thomas compels him to go along. The siblings set Paul back in the vehicle and drive to the homestead, where Charlotte's folks demonstrate Joseph right. They need more medication in excess, so they will not take in somebody hurt so severely. Charlotte fights, yet all at once she's overlooked. Notwithstanding, her folks in all actuality do consent to allow Thomas to remain, which would leave Paul and Joseph with additional assets at their home. Joseph promptly leaves, and when Thomas follows him, a contention results in which Joseph faults Thomas for their father's approaching demise. Incensed, Thomas pushes his sibling to the ground and starts stifling him. However, when he understands what he's doing, he pulls back. Joseph quickly moves in the vehicle and drives away with his oblivious dad. So Joseph joins the family at the ranch. Subsequently, Charlotte imparts a real decent food to Thomas and shows him a portion of her possessions, which Thomas has never seen. The youngsters share a sweet second and kiss, just to be intruded on by Charlotte's dad, who sends his girl to another room. Coming back, Joseph sees the sheep running in dread and hills of soil all over the place, and that implies the animals are moving underground. At the point when he makes it home, he sees a way of soil close to the wall, so he fears the beasts might be under the house. In the wake of dealing with his father, Joseph goes to the horse shelter and starts gathering objects to make another arrangement. He likewise begins hindering every one of the windows, and as he moves around the house, he falls in when he steps on a rug. There's an opening under it, so he closes. The beasts are now inside the structure. At the ranch, Charlotte finds Thomas sneaking about the kitchen. He's actually stressed over his father, so he needs to discover some medication and leave. Charlotte gives him the medication and he says thanks to her with an embrace as he vows to return. Ignorant somebody can hear them. Thomas runs out, however before he can arrive at the door, a ranch worker focuses his weapon at him, blaming him for taking. A frantic Thomas attempts to make sense of Charlotte gave it to him, yet the man doesn't trust him. Every one of the workers group up and take Thomas to the animal dwelling place, where they tie him up and play a music to conceal how they're going to treat him. They get Thomas's legs and a man prepares to shoot them, yet at that point an opening shows up under him and he falls, bombing the shot. Different men rush to keep an eye on him simultaneously and Animal leaps into a more healthy place. In the fundamental house, Charlotte's folks awaken when they hear a clamor. The dad lights a flame to go examine, just for an animal to get in the room and assault. The light falls and promptly lights a fire while the beast hops from the dad to the mother, attempting to kill them both. The dad pulls it back and the mother runs out of the space to track down her little girl, yet the animal leaps on her before she can go excessively far. The beast shakes to change once more and begins vomiting all once again the lady prior to striking. In her room, Charlotte hears how both her folks are killed. When the clamors stop, she emerges and is stunned to find a path of blood, which she follows until she tracks down the animal in the washroom with her mom's body in its back. At the horse shelter, Charlotte is let be. The men are attempting to ward off the animals without much of any result. Individually they begin to wind up dead, and the people who figure out how to get out are pursued too as additional animals continue to show up. The stable before long bursts into flames and Thomas figures out how to push over the furniture he's attached to, breaking the wood to free his hands. At that point an animal tracks down him, yet before it can assault, it has chance somewhere near Charlotte. Subsequently the adolescents run out and Thomas sees the house ablaze. Charlotte makes sense of her folks are gone, so they consent to go to Thomas's place. Back to Joseph, he tosses a lot of furniture into the opening, expecting to delay. Then, at that point, he keeps an eye on his oblivious father and kisses his temple prior to preparing to battle. The opening in the entryway abruptly opens, but it's simply Thomas and Charlotte. Joseph concedes he really wants Thomas's assistance, yet their discussion is interfered with by Paul at last awakening. He rapidly takes the medication and advises his children to continue to battle. Joseph imparts his arrangement to the others and they accumulate every one of the gas jars they can find in the outbuilding while Rocco continues to bark to alarm them of approaching risk. The gathering likewise moves an old cooler into the house. Next Thomas and Charlotte start building up each excess window while Joseph makes a heap of furniture and pours every one of the gas on it. On top, he additionally adds each touchy article he could find and one of his father's cigarettes, which is gradually burning to the ground. Out of nowhere the heap covering the opening begins shaking simultaneously and Animal descends the smokestack in the room with Paul. From the opening another beast emerges and when it crosses an entryway, Thomas cuts it from behind. The animal promptly goes after back, however Thomas recovers his blade and cuts it in the head, really killing it now. A third one pursues Charlotte and she rapidly destroys it. Then, at that point, the team hurries to rejoin Joseph and they start moving the cooler again just for the way to open behind them. Uncovering Paul is up and canvassed in blood since he killed the fireplace beast. Paul takes Charlotte's firearm and starts taking shots at the floor to stir things up around town ground floor. Anyway the swarm is gigantic and soon it shows up in the hallway, running towards him. Paul kicks the first to cause some shaking, and the weight makes most animals fall through the floor. A couple of beasts actually figure out how to remain, yet the youngsters hurry to kill them before they can hurt Paul, who is dazzled by the triplets' collaboration. Subsequently, the three teenagers and Rocco hurry to the cooler. Rather than following them, Paul shuts the entryway and stays to delay. The gathering conceals inside the cooler while Paul recalls the day he held his infants firmly, letting them know it would be okay. Another crowd of animals rushes in and Paul occupies them until the heap of furniture at long last detonates, making the entire house disintegrate and burst into flames. The cooler begins rolling and continues onward for a few minutes. At the point when it at long last stops, the adolescents emerge and frantically scan the trash for Paul. Just for an animal to out of nowhere leap out. The gathering rushes to the vehicle and drives away as the beast pursues them shrouded in fire. Charlotte's slugs sit idle, so when the beast is sufficiently close, she hits it with her weapon and makes it go to pieces. A couple of miles later, The gathering stops the vehicle and takes a gander at the stars, which they never saw before on the grounds that they were generally inside around evening time. The following morning the gathering gets back to the house and concludes they would rather not reconstruct a similar spot. Subsequent to get together any provisions they could find, they cover all their friends and family and say one last farewell. Wanting to track down another home in the ranches down the valley. Try to buy in and turn on notices so you can observe more recordings like this. Gratitude for watching.